Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars about the West Oxfordshire property market. Tonight we've got myself, Brendan, Managing Director of Parkers, Whitley and Ensham, and West Oxfordshire's very own compliance expert, Katie McCall, our Senior Property Manager. And we're going to take, over the course of the next sort of maximum 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to take a slightly light-hearted but nonetheless very important look at some of the key aspects of being a landlord and managing a property. So there's some good stuff in here. You'll be delighted to learn. I've got just 5 slides and I'm about to click across to number 2 already. But the key theme for today is the 7 deadly sins of property management. So we can count them down with me. And we're going to look at the implications of getting these things wrong, and then what to do if you need any help. And then lastly, because it's still first month of the year, you know, we're only in January, I can do a very quick overview of what's going on in the local market. It's really interesting. There's been a massive shift in media reporting on what's happening in our property market to the positive. It's ceased being negative and is now almost entirely positive. And we'll look at the impact that that is having on the local property market at the end of tonight's chat. But without further ado, let's go into the 7 deadly sins of property management, and the first of which is periodic tenancies. Katie, talk to us about periodic tenancies.
One of our favourite things to talk about. So as a landlord that manages your own tenant, you have a bit of a way of falling into a periodic tenancy and not doing the rent reviews and everything like that we do in the office for our managed tenancies. So it's really important that your current AST, which might move over to an AT when the rent reform bill comes in, that it is current and it reflects the current law. The law is changing all the time, and your tenancy agreement is your one massive legal document that is between yourself and the tenant, and it lays out the rules, who does what, when, where and how. So it's the most important thing to make sure you've got a current AST, you review your rent. You know, the rents are increasing hugely. 2 years ago, you would have rented a 2-bedroom house at about £800. You're now looking at £1,200. That is a huge profit as a landlord that you are missing out on every single month you don't review your rent. So that's really important. You also have an obligation to keep your tenant's right to rent up to date. So at any one time, the government can ask who you've got in your rented property, and you need to be able to prove that they've got the right to rent in the UK. Now, if they're British, you hold a copy of their passport, and that continues for the entire time they're in the tenancy, in the property, sorry, on a tenancy. But there are some tenants that may not be British, may have certain rights and rules to adhere to when living in the country, and may have certain visas that will expire. And it is your job as a landlord to ensure that you always hold the correct documents and you can prove that your tenants have the right to be your tenants. And if you don't, there is a really large fine on that. So it is £3,000 per tenant. So if you had a couple and their children, that's a £6,000 fine. If you had a property, say 4 or 5 bedrooms with sharers, suddenly you're looking at £12,000 to £15,000 fine and 5 years imprisonment on that one. So it's really, really important. It's your investment property, and you need to make sure that it's working for you and you have got the best return possible. So periodic tenancies is our biggest thing that we deal with here. The next deadly sin.
I'm going to come in there. I'm going to come in there quickly, Katie. Yeah. Just for those that were listening into that bit, just to clarify, AST and AT. AST is assured short hold tenancy, which is what we have at the moment, and AT is an assured tenancy. So what the Renters Reform Bill is going to do is see any assured short hold tenancies moving on to assured tenancies. But also, just one other point to pick on very quickly. There are not all periodic tenancies are created equal. You can have both statutory and Help me out here.
Oh gosh, statutory and what is the word?
I'm having a mental block here. Goodness me. But there are two different types essentially, and your tenancy agreement will tell you which sort that you automatically move on to at contractual, statutory and contractual. It's come back to me. But they are different. And as a landlord, you need to know which sort you're on, because you will have different obligations and different bits of legislation that can affect you, and indeed extra liability if you are on one or other. So do have a look at that. If you've got tenants on what we call a rolling tenancy, a periodic tenancy, there are two different types and they are not the same. But anyway, back to the Katie show and tell us about number 2, compliance.
So just to add to that, we did touch on the ASTs and the ATs on the last webinar, which if you did or didn't see, you'll be able to get the link on our YouTube and you can rewatch exactly what we say on there. So that's worth a watch if you fall into that category. So yeah, the next deadly sin is compliance. And this, again, I'll say it on all of them, I'm sure, but this is really, really important. So there are over 177 regulations when you are renting your property out to a tenant, and there is an awful lot of compliance, and this changes all the time. So I've picked the most important ones, but there are far more, and we're just doing a little touch into this. So first, to kick it off, is your landlord gas safety. So they are certificates that have to be done on all gas appliances, boilers, cookers, everything gas in the property every 12 months. You cannot go a singular day without a gas safety certificate in place. The implications are huge. The fine is £6,000 per item. You can also face 6 months imprisonment. But the most important thing on this, I say, is your landlord insurance will not be valid if you don't keep up to date with your gas safety. And if the worst happens and a gas fire happens at the property, not only will you not be insured, but if there is a death in the property, you could be facing manslaughter charges. So it's really important that you keep up to date on that. We book ours 45 days ahead. I cannot emphasize enough that being in time on this and booking ahead is the most vital thing. You can have it carried out before it's due. It's a bit like an MOT on a car, so it can be carried out before the expiry date, and the expiry date will still stand in place. So it's really important that one is in place at all times. The next one is your EPC. So we touched on it in our last webinar. There are plans coming in for EPCs. It has been pushed back slightly. But what we are saying is they are going to come in. So the best advice to you is, if you have got large works that need carrying out at the property, plan them in now. Start doing them step by step. You've got a few financial years that you can get some works done, which obviously will help you. So get all of them booked in and start making your way to the right regulations on the EPC. An EPC must be valid when you market the property, but also when you renew a tenancy, you must have a valid EPC. So they do last 10 years, and it's £5,000 for any breach on that one. The next one is EICR for short, so that's your electrical installation certificate. These certificates last 5 years. What I would say is that this became law in 2019, and so the first lot that were done in 2019 will be due this year. So there's going to be a huge influx in the market of singular landlords like yourself needing an electrician. Now, if you don't have a regular electrician, you might find it hard to get hold of one, find it hard to get booked in. They're going to be swamped. Their prices may well increase. So the sooner you can look at getting this booked in, the better. If you need any help on anything like that, you can reach out to my property management team. But every 5 years that needs to be done. They're called C1s and C2s on the report that will come up as minor issues. So they're rated, from C1 down to C4. C1s and 2s have to be carried out by law within 30 days of being found. So you get your certificate, you've got 30 days to rectify your C1 and 2 faults. And that certificate lasts for 5 years then, and it's £3,000 per breach on that one. Yeah, it all adds up, each one of these, definitely. Next one, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms regulations 2022. So this had a bit of a change where carbon monoxide alarms came in and are now law. So they need to be in place in any living accommodation with a fixed combustion appliance. Now, a couple of the questions we get is what happens if my boiler is in the loft? That's not classed as a living accommodation. So you don't legally have to have one there, but best practice, I always tell my landlords, just have one popped on by the loft hatch. It's such a useful thing to have. It's a tenant's life. It's your biggest asset if there is a fire or a carbon leak. And they cost £20 from B&Q, and they can screw into the wall. It's a really easy fix. The fine on that one is £5,000 per breach. Now, what they mean by per breach on this is smoke alarm by any appliance, combustion appliance. So you may have a boiler, you may have a gas fire, you may have an open fire. So there's numerous places you will need a carbon monoxide alarm, but you also need a smoke alarm on every single level of the property. So if you are missing 3 or 4 of those, it's £5,000 per breach. Before you know it, that's a £20,000 fine. Hopefully nothing wrong happens to the property. It is also a landlord's responsibility to ensure that these are working. So on day 1 of the tenancy, you must be able to prove that it is in working order. Now that's normally covered by your inventory, which is absolutely fine. But if you decide as a landlord that manages your own tenancy not to have an inventory, you must think about the way of how you're going to document and prove that that was in working order at the time that the tenancy started. It is a tenant's responsibility to continue checking these, and we ask them to do it on a monthly basis. I say to them, get into a habit of when you get paid, or first of the month, first weekend of the month, just go around, test all your smoke alarms, all your carbon alarms. If there's anything wrong with them, most of them can have a battery replaced, and if they can't have a battery replaced, or you have replaced the batteries and that hasn't fixed the problem, it is then a landlord responsibility to sort that out. So the tenant's responsible for letting you know that it isn't working, but it's a landlord responsibility to then replace that. And lastly, another one that changed a couple of years ago is chimney sweeping. So I was talking to a landlord last Friday, quite a long-term landlord, always rented his properties out, and he asked me about the chimney sweeping. It used to be a tenant responsibility. That is no longer. It is a landlord responsibility. He said, oh, well, my mate down the road, he sweeps his chimney himself. Can I do it myself? The answer is, unless you're qualified, no. And if you do, and you don't have a certificate to show what's happening, that you've carried it out on this day, then your insurance will not be valid. So it's really important that you have your chimney swept by a proper regulated person, and you receive the certificate and you give your tenants that certificate. We recommend that you have it swept before it's needed. So around the September, October time, they'll check the cowl and the chimney for birds' nests, everything like that. And then we also recommend that you have it swept again at the end of the season. So our seasons are changing slightly. Winter used to end sort of February, March time, that's dragging out. So I would say April, May time, have it swept for the end of the season, and then have it swept again September, October for beginning of the season.
Thanks, Katie. Excuse me, just losing my voice there. Some really good points, and a couple of sort of practical additional things from me on this. One, something we see quite regularly. I remember going into properties that were actually managed by another agent and realising that although they thought they were compliant, they weren't. And the two common mistakes to make with the carbon monoxide and smoke alarm regs, it's a bit of a dull point, I'm sorry about this, but a heat alarm is specifically excluded. And you often see heat alarms in kitchens. You're allowed to have heat alarms, that's fine, but you have to have a smoke alarm on each floor. And if a floor only has a heat alarm, then that is not compliant. And then the other thing that is often overlooked is if you take the smoke alarm off the ceiling and have a quick look at it, they've almost all got an expiry date on the back of them. If they haven't got an expiry date, it probably means it's a really old alarm anyway, but they should have a little white sticker with an expiry date on it. And if it's there beyond the expiry date, then again, you're on the wrong side of the law. So do check those and make sure they're updated. But we're whistling through. We're about to hit number 3, deposit. I mean, deposit's dead easy, isn't it? We just take some money, put it in an approved account. Surely that's it, Katie.
Well, you would hope so, but the number one thing that we find that landlords who manage their own tenancies don't do is they don't put it in an approved scheme. They put it in a separate bank account and they think, oh, brilliant, I've got it, I'll leave it there, I won't ever touch it, we're all hunky-dory. We're not. So at the point of taking a deposit, you have 30 days to protect it with a government scheme. Now, protecting it is also linked to your prescribed information in your tenancy agreement. So at the end of your tenancy agreement, you will have prescribed information, and that tells the tenant how much the deposit is, who it's held by, and all the regulations about deposits. They are very much hand in hand linked together. So you must have it in an insured scheme, and your prescribed information must reflect that. If you don't do that, there are huge implications on this one. The tenant can quite easily complain, it can get all the way to court. And if you do find yourself in court about this, you can actually end up paying your tenant between 1 and 3 times the amount of the deposit plus their original deposit. So if their deposit is a £1,500 deposit, you're suddenly paying £4,500 in a fine to them, as you know, money back to the tenant, plus their original £1,500. So you're £6,000 down by not complying with the 30-day rule. So that one is really, really important. We use DPS. There are many different schemes that you can use. They don't cost a lot of money at all. Ours is £40 plus VAT for a year. So it really isn't worth not complying to that one.
Oh, and don't forget the double jeopardy rule. So if you've renewed that tenancy once, then that £6,000 becomes £12,000. Renew it twice, guess what? You're up to £18,000. So yeah, that can be quite significant and painful. So come on then, tell us about insurance and what a landlord needs to consider for that.
Yes, there are many different types of insurance, and I was having a conversation with one of our landlords last week who's rented her property for a really long time. We then popped it on for sales with our sales team here, and I was just chatting her through with it being empty, make sure you have the heating on, etc. And one of the biggest things I tell landlords is when that property is empty and you're no longer renting it, you are no longer a landlord. So make sure you change your insurance, because we all know any insurance company will try absolutely everything to get out of a claim. And she hadn't changed her insurance from landlord insurance to homeowner insurance. She also hadn't checked her policy as to how long a void period a property can have. So that is in your small terms and conditions of your insurance. But what you often find is they will not allow a property to be empty for any longer than 30 days. And there may well be stipulations on when it is empty, it needs to be checked weekly, and you need to record that you've checked it. You know, you need to have the heating on at this time of year. So it's really important that if you've got a void period, you ensure you're still covered in your terms and conditions. If you are no longer looking at being a landlord, or you're in the process of selling it, you change your insurance to homeowner insurance. And then when you are a landlord, make sure you do have landlord insurance, because it also covers you for any damage that may happen to a tenant when they're in their property. Now, you may think, oh, I've got an unfurnished property, so that's absolutely fine, I don't need that. Furniture also includes anything like your stairs, your carpets, your thresholds. And we all know at the top of the stairs, your carpet can, after time, start rucking, get a little bit thin. If your tenant then trips on that carpet and falls down the stairs and you're not insured, you could find yourself paying out thousands of pounds in compensation. So make sure you've got the best insurance and you've got landlord insurance, and you're always covered. The other insurance policy that we've done a lot on lately is the rent and legal protection. So it really is becoming a legal world in lettings, and when the rent reform bill comes in, it's going to become even more so. It's quite tough at the moment with the cost of living crisis, and there are a few tenants that have found themselves in the unfortunate position of not being able to pay their rent. We're very lucky that we pick the right tenants here at Parker's, so we really don't have a huge amount to deal with it. We've seen a little increase over the last 6 months, but most of our landlords that have found themselves in that position have got our rent and legal protection policy that we put in place through Good Lord. It's a really minimal cost, £30 per month, but it doesn't just cover your rent, it covers your legal expenses. So once you find yourself in the position of having to go to court to remove a tenant, this process is months and months long, and your solicitor's fees are racking up, and you will kick yourself that you didn't pay a small amount every month to have that covered. So it will protect you with all your solicitor's fees, it covers the rent, but the important thing with the policy we've chosen to use is that when the property is empty, it will also cover the rent for, I think it's another month or two, whilst you're doing the property up. So it's not just about getting the tenant out, going through the whole legal process. It's also about returning that property to the best standard. And whilst you're going through this whole process, if you've got the rent and legal protection policy in place, you can rest assured that it's not hitting your own bank account and you're all covered. So it really is worth doing. If you've got any questions on that, again, me and my team would be happy to help you along that one.
Thanks, Katie. Next up then, number 5 is one on unlawful fees. And this is an absolute classic that I see when I'm talking to landlords who manage their own properties, because unfortunately the Tenant Fees Act is so prescriptive. It's not about tripping up by charging something you shouldn't. It actually tells you the only things you can charge for, and it's that prescriptive. The list even includes the rent. There are only sort of 5 things really that you can charge for, one of which being the rent. So it's really easy to get this one wrong, and there is no wiggle room. It is absolutely watertight. So tell us a bit more about that one.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's really quite simple. There is a very minimum amount of things that we can charge a tenant. The aim of the Act was to reduce the costs that tenants face when they're moving home. It's certainly done that. When they first take on a property, the deposit is capped at 5 weeks. 5 weeks, no more, not a penny more. You used to, when you rented a property to tenants that have pets, you used to be able to charge them 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Not allowed anymore. Absolute maximum of 5-week deposit. There are ways that you can change that slightly if you are accepting a pet in increasing the rent, but no more larger deposits. And there is a cap for contract variation. So if the tenant says to me, I'd like to add my partner on, absolutely fine, and we are able to charge for that, but it is capped at £50 including VAT. So that you need to look into that. They are able to pay the costs for referencing the partner, right to rent checks, everything like that, but it is completely capped at £50. You are also allowed to charge for the assignment or novation of a tenancy. So really, anything that a tenant comes to you and says, I need to change my legally binding document, AST, between myself and the landlord, we're able to do, we're able to charge, but it is a cap of £50. There isn't too much more we're allowed to charge tenants. So if you felt that the tenant wasn't looking after the property and you wanted to go round again and do another management visit, and you're thinking, well, that takes up my time, I'm going to charge an admin, unfortunately not allowed. So there are lots of things that we used to charge that you can't charge anymore. But if you need the link to the document that shows you what you can charge and the maximum you can charge, again, just pop me an email and I'll send that over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. Next up, number 6 is management visits, or more often known as inspections. And clearly there are ways that we can trip up doing management visits as well.
There are, yeah. The reason we call them management visits rather than inspections is inspections sounds quite intruding on the tenant, that we're inspecting their housework and how they, live almost. We are in a way, but if we use the word management visit, it avoids any confrontation on that. So this is one of the biggest things we do on our managed properties. We will visit 6 weeks into a tenancy, every 6 months, and we will also carry out a visit for a pre-checkout when those tenants are leaving. So it's really important that you do carry these out. You do always have to bear in mind quiet enjoyment. So we don't want to be going too often. Every 2-3 months is too much for a tenant. They will suddenly start saying to you, I'm not getting quiet enjoyment of the property. So management visits are important, but they're important done the right way and in the right timely manner. When you book a management visit, you have to give a minimum of 24 hours notice to the tenant. You can't suddenly text them, email them 9 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm going to pop round today and do a management visit. Is that okay? Because it's really not okay. You have to give 24 hours notice. When you're doing the visit, it's really important that you are looking slightly at their housework and how they look after it. But if they've got a couple of dishes from last night's dinner, that's not your worry. Your worry when you're checking these properties is that you are compliant with all of the HHSRS rules. So we always bear that.
Sorry, HHSRS, Housing Health and Safety Rating System.
No acronyms, sorry. So yeah, we're checking that at all times. We're checking all the compliance. So we test all the smoke alarms, the carbon alarms. Like Brendan said, we check the dates on those and we record that we've checked that and they're all in date. There's a lot in the news at the moment about mould. So there is a new law that is looking like it's going to come in place, where basically a couple of years ago, a young boy of 2 years old did sadly pass away, and it was deemed that he died due to direct and prolonged exposure to mould. So this is all over the news at the moment, and it's a big thing. Tenants are aware of it. And basically, it tells you as a landlord that you need to deal with issues really quickly. You can't say to a tenant, oh, mould is down to your tenant lifestyle and you need to change your lifestyle and I'm not doing anything. You need to be seen to be doing the right things. So you always need to document all of this progress. I was speaking to a landlord this morning where he's done exactly the right thing. He's had Rentokure out to have a look at the mould. They've deemed it is tenant lifestyle and a condensation issue. He's now got that in writing. Once you have that in writing, you've then got certain things that you can do with a tenant to improve that. We normally find it's all about education with tenants. So when I'm on a management visit, I'm looking at how much washing they've got drying. Have they got the trickle vents open? Have they got the windows open if they don't have trickle vents? Is there condensation on the windows? Are they seen to be wiping that condensation down? Every property will get condensation. I live in a new build. I get condensation every morning on my windows and I simply wipe it down. It then doesn't move into a mould issue. But some tenants aren't aware of this. They're not sure what to wipe it down with. They would be worried about damaging the paintwork around the window. So it really is about education to your tenants about the mould. And to be seen to be doing all the right things. They can have dehumidifiers in the property. They're no longer as expensive to run as we once thought they were. They're efficient, they're cheap, and actually your washing will dry a lot quicker with a dehumidifier in the room, removing all of that moisture. So that's some of the things we're looking at. We're also looking at how many tenants have I got in that property? Have I let it to one single person, say a male, and I'm going around there and there seems to be a lot of heels. What he does in his spare time is up to him. But there's 2 toothbrushes, there's women's deodorant, makeup, things like that. Because in the back of your mind, you always need to remember that you have to report the right to rent to the government. And if you feel that a tenant has got somebody staying, then that needs to be addressed. Now, tenants can have visitors, but they can only have a long-term visitor for 2 weeks in every 6 months of their tenancy. If they have somebody visiting more often than that, say they've got a new partner and that partner stays every weekend, they need to be added onto the tenancy. And there are various different ways that you can do that. You can have them as a permitted occupier, so they have to abide by all of the rules, but they are not financially liable for the property, or they can become a joint and severally liable tenant. So there's lots of things you're looking at when you're doing a management visit, and it's really important that that's recorded down. You're also making a little note of when does the decorating look like it might need doing. If this tenant decides not to renew in April, do I need to have a decorator before I re-let it? Are the carpets in good condition? The better condition you can keep the property, the happier your tenants will be, the longer they'll stay, but also you've got a little bit more oomph behind you when you are doing a rent review. If you're asking market value rent, you need to make sure that that property is presented to the best it can be and the tenants feel that they're getting good value for money on their rental.
Fabulous. Thank you, Katie. So up to number 7 of the 7 deadly sins, which is putting your landlord hat on. And that sounds pretty intriguing. I hate wearing hats, even in this cold weather. So what do we mean by putting your landlord hat on?
Well, you know, it's really easy to fall into a trap of being friends with your tenant. And you always need to remember that you, firstly, are a landlord, and that secondly, you are running this as a business. So we do say be cautious when you're renting to family and friends. If you've got the property that they need, that's absolutely fine, but don't ever shy away from putting a formal tenancy agreement in place. Even if you have a very minimal gesture of rent, at least £1 a month, but the tenancy agreement covers all of the obligations for landlords and tenants, and should anything go wrong, you have that in place. You know, one day you are a friend and, you know, the next day something could happen and suddenly people turn. You know, the financial world and the stresses people come under can change the way that they behave and the relationship that they have with you. So it's always really important, family, friends, or complete stranger, always cover yourself with a tenancy. It is the biggest asset you will own in your life, and it's really important to remember that. You are giving that essentially to a stranger or to family and friends, and you need to cover yourself as best as possible. When I say put your landlord hat on, think of it as a business. You need to think about how much return are you getting on your investment. It is your biggest investment. Are you getting market value rent? I was dealing with a rent review last week and they were £500 a month under market value. Now that's a huge £6,000 a year. What could you do with an extra £6,000 a year in your pocket? Suddenly, you can afford that family holiday. You can afford that car that you've wanted for the last 5 years. And it's really important that you think about your investment and that your investment is working for you. I always say to a landlord, try and have a separate email address. So I work for Parker's, I've got a Parker's email address. If I was an individual landlord, I would have my personal email address for all my shopping and my nice things, but I would also have a business email address. When a tenant receives an email and it comes from a business email address, you know, Katie McCall at Parker's Properties, it's got a little bit more oomph behind it and it just feels a bit more formal than it is your own emails. You will also be able to keep track and have all your emails to hand, different folders, and be able to put your hands on the evidence that you told this tenant this on this date and time, because you're not trawling through all your shopping receipts on your emails. So that's another really important tip on that one. And remember, it's not a hobby. This is an investment and you're running it as a business. So you can get emotionally attached, especially if it was your family home that you're renting out. And sometimes you have to sit back and remind yourself, I'm doing this as a business, so, you know, treat it as such. Don't be afraid to spend money. You get tax relief every single year on the improvements you make on the property. And when we get to January, I have a lot of conversations with landlords saying, we haven't done anything actually in the last 8 months at the property. You've got a little bit of your cap there on your tax relief to spend. Let's do something. You know, what does the property need doing? Is the boiler looking like it's coming to an end? Does it need decorating? Does it need carpets? Make sure that you're always getting the most you can from your tax relief money. Another couple of things, keep everything in writing and formal. We fall into this trap of giving a tenant a quick call. Oh yeah, no problem, I'll come out and look at your mould, or yeah, that's no problem, you can renew, and I won't increase the rent, or I might increase it by £100. Once you've had that phone call, if you end up going to court, you've got no evidence. You don't have a computer system like we have here where we can make notes. So I always say, have a telephone conversation with your tenant or see them in person, but make sure that you follow everything up in writing. If you've made a management visit, formalise that, have a sheet that you've written down, and then email your tenant. And it can be the simplest of things. Thank you for your time today. I carried out your management visit. Everything's lovely. Please just be reminded to have your trickle vents open when you dry washing in the property. Anything like that, just always follow it up in writing. You've then got that evidence. If, God forbid, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, you go to court and you need that. So keep everything in writing and formal. The other thing is, don't let arrears creep up, especially at this time of year. Your tenant may have said to you, oh, it's just a little bit difficult at the moment because I've had Christmas. I will pay my rent at the end of the month. Make sure you formalise that in writing. Dear Mr. Tenant, thank you for your conversation regarding the rent. I understand you'll pay this at the end of the month. When it's overdue, send them a formal arrears letter chasing them. This is money owed to you. If you don't pay your credit card, the credit card company are going to formally write to you and tell you. It's exactly the same. It's a business, the money is owed, and it's owed on a certain date. And if it's not paid, you must continue to chase that and have evidence of chasing that. And the other thing, when you get friendly with the tenant, do remember quiet enjoyment. So the last thing you want to do is have a tenant say, I'm not getting quiet enjoyment, you're not coming in. You must always give them 24 hours notice. We aim to give our tenants, most of the time, at least a week's notice. They like to have a bit of a tidy up. They like to know that you're coming. So don't spring things on tenants. The worst thing you can do is phone a tenant up in the morning and say, oh, hi, I'm just going to pop round at 12 o'clock today and do a management visit. It's not okay. They may say it's okay, and then things turn months down the line, and suddenly they'll be saying to you, well, hang on, I never get quiet enjoyment. You never give me 24 hours notice. So treat it as a business, follow the rules, and make sure you always give your tenants 24 hours notice.
Katie, wow, thank you. 7 deadly sins, but bucket loads of value in there. I mean, some absolutely cracking advice and really clear, useful things that allow people to see if they're perhaps doing something wrong. Now, are you up for a challenge?
Always.
So we had a number of landlords book onto this, and a couple of them, in fact, I've got 3 questions that were sent in advance. I'm gonna put you on the spot here, okay, and see how you can do with these. So first question I've got is, what happens if your tenant does not let you in, or a contractor in, to do a landlord gas safety check?
Okay, this is quite a common one, and landlords tend to think, well, it's compliance, it's the law. Of course I'm allowed in. I'm going to use my key and come in. Unfortunately, not the case. So when I was talking earlier about documenting everything, this is one of the things that you could fall on. So you need to document that you've asked the tenant to let you in, and if they've said, no, you can't come in, I don't want you to come in, you can't force your way into the property. You then re-document to the tenant, I understand you won't let me in the property today, please come back to me with a suitable date that I can come in. And you just have to keep trying. We went to court quite recently. It's about the only time Parkers have been to court with a tenant, and that tenant hadn't let us in for a gas safety. Now, the only reason that case did not get thrown out of court is because we documented the 20, 30 times that we tried to gain access to the property to keep the landlord compliant. If we hadn't had that proof, there is no doubt we would have got thrown out of court, and we would have had to start the whole process again and pay for the whole process again. So it's really important, but there literally is nothing you can force your way into a property on. You just have to document that you've tried.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. The second of the 3 questions I've got, and what the landlord said is, what should I do if my tenant's deposit is higher than the 5-week rent cap? And I guess there are sort of 2 circumstances that could lead to this. One is if it's a more recent tenancy, but they didn't know about the rent cap, or it might be a pre-May 2019 one that they just haven't done anything about it, you know, because the law wasn't in before then. But obviously it's come in and affects tenancies, you know, that predate that now. So nothing is exempt from that 5-week cap. So you've got more than 5 weeks rent. What should you do?
Well, I'm guessing it's not in a government scheme, because if it was, you would have had a reminder from that scheme to say your cap, you're above the cap and you need to rectify that. So firstly, it needs to be in a government scheme, otherwise you can find yourself paying thousands and thousands of pounds. So get it into a government scheme. But if it's higher than the 5 weeks, the process we follow is we return that whole deposit to a tenant, because remember, once you've received a deposit, you only have 30 days to secure it. So you must return it because it will have been more than 30 days. You ask the tenant to repay the deposit to you at the cap of 5 weeks, say £1,500, and then you start registering it with a government scheme, making sure that your prescribed information in the tenancy agreement is up to date. So you may find you have to reissue your tenancy agreement as well, and then you're all law abiding. So you return it to the tenant, open up a scheme, tenant repays it to you, you pop it into the scheme, make sure your tenancy, your prescribed information reflects that, and then you're good to go.
Very clear, thank you. And you'll be delighted to hear the last question I've had from a different landlord was, I don't like having the rent review conversation with my tenant. What can I do? I don't want to upset them.
And we get that all the time. Of course you don't. You may be renting out the annex next to your house. They may be a friend, or they've become friends because you've rented to them for the last 5-10 years. We're British. We don't like talking about money. We certainly don't like putting rent up. But it is a business and everybody needs to pay market value rent. You're actually doing your tenant a disservice by not having the market value rent, because if they do need to move on, then they're going to find themselves not being able to afford that. They're not used to paying that rent. So what you need to do is come to us, and we have a landlord rent review service. I carry out a rent review on the property, tell you what it's due, I negotiate between yourselves, your tenants, issue a new tenancy agreement, make sure you're compliant, carry out the right to rent. Lots of things that are done included in that service, and it's called our landlord rent review service. Drop me an email and I'd be more than happy to advise you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. So I'm about to come into a very quick review of what's happening in the property market here in West Oxfordshire since the start of the year. So, you know, we're only 2 weeks in, but it's been an interesting start to the year. But before I do that, I'm going to let Katie sum up. I've got sort of 2 questions for you, Katie. The first is, if having listened to this webinar, someone's thinking, oh my goodness me, either I'm not sure I'm compliant, or I know I'm not, or I've got a question, you know, a landlord's in a situation with one of the things that you've highlighted, what should they do? And have you got any closing top tips for us?
Yeah, so we have looked at all of the processes and what we offer our clients. And over the last year, we've put in place a landlord rescue service. So we can rescue you from the compliance, we can do management visits, make sure you're compliant, do your rent review, do your tenancy agreement, we can hold your deposit. Anything and everything that you need that I've mentioned today that you're not covered on will fall under the landlord rescue service. So pop me an email and I'll be more than happy to give you a call and we can sort that out for you. Top tips. I guess my top tips are give tenants deadlines. So if you don't give a tenant a deadline, this will go on and on and on forever. If I find an issue at the property, you know, say I do find that the property is mouldy and the tenant's been drying a lot of clothes, I will say to them, I need you to wipe off that mould. I need you to start using the trickle vents, dry less clothes, and have a dehumidifier or a tumble dryer or something. And I'll come back in 7 days' time and I need to see a huge improvement to the property. What you're doing at the moment has a detrimental effect to the property, and I need to make sure that you've taken my advice on board and you rectify that. So you've got 7 days to do that. Tenants like a deadline, otherwise it meanders on forever. So give your tenants deadlines on everything necessary. Run it as a business. Have your separate email address, put everything in writing and make it formal. We're all friends until we're not friends. So you need to make sure that you are covered. And then my biggest tip for landlords that manage everything themselves is diary reminders are your best friend. Diary reminders for your management visit. You might say, oh, Brendan, I went to your house only a couple of weeks ago. Suddenly, you actually look at the dates, that's 6 months ago. Life goes really fast. So diary reminders for management visits, certificate end dates, get them booked in advance. What else can you have diary reminders for? Tenancy end dates, rent reviews, any contact that you need to have with your tenant, I have a diary reminder for, and that way you can't miss it and you can't fall behind, and then hopefully you're not going to get any penalties and you're not going to prison.
Wise words from West Oxfordshire's compliance queen. Thank you very much, Katie. What I'm going to do now is just very quickly talk you through what's been going on so far this year. So this is today's graph from Rightmove. It shows in green the level of people searching to buy a home in Oxfordshire compared to the same time last year, and on the orange line the number of people or the change in number of people looking to rent a property in Oxfordshire compared to this time last year. And you'll see that both are in positive territory. You know, sales market has been absolutely flying. I've been astounded as to how busy we have been on the sales market so far this year, both with valuations, viewings and offers received. You know, it's a great start to the year, and I think that is largely down to the fact that the media news has changed from negative only 4 weeks ago through to almost entirely positive. In fact, this morning the data about inflation shows that inflation had crept up to 4%, and yet the media certainly said it's okay, it's only a blip, and interest rates are still going to be coming down. You know, 4 weeks ago they'd have jumped on that and said doom and gloom, oh, it's all going the wrong way again. Now they're saying no, it's only a blip, it's going the right way. So the sentiment has really changed, and we're seeing that translating to activity in the market. And you can see there that buyer demand is up 30%. On the lettings market, it's a slightly different picture. We're still seeing a real shortage in stock, good quality rental stock. You know, the number of properties available to rent in West Oxfordshire compared to pre-COVID levels is down by 60%. It's been a huge drop, but the demand is changing. Rents have gone up so much that we're seeing a real pressure on demand of the smaller, 1 and 2 bedroom properties, and the larger sort of 4-bedroom properties are taking a bit longer to rent. And I think there are 2 factors at play here. One is that the average tenancy length is continuing to grow. So tenants aren't moving because they've seen, perhaps they're getting a discount because they've been there a long time and the rents haven't been put up, or they can't afford what it is they want to move to. And also, I think there's some additional downward pressure in that tenants are downsizing because of the cost of living crisis. And not only is their rent gone up, but of course council taxes rising, gas and electric are up hugely, and so we're seeing additional pressure on people that would have perhaps taken a 3-bed before are now taking a 2-bed, a 4-bed before are now taking a 3-bed. So there has been a bit of change in pressure there. So some interesting things going on, and we hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour. But if anybody would like to know any more about what we've been talking about today, or wants to talk about renting or selling a property in West Oxfordshire, be delighted to chat about it. It's our favourite subject, as you can probably tell. Thank you for your patience. We promised 45 minutes, it's been 47. So sorry for the extra 2 minutes, but I hope you got value from those extra 120 seconds. Thank you for bearing with us, and please do get in touch if you've got any further questions. Cheers. Bye for now.